Well, welcome along to the interview today, and my guest comes not all the way from Tasmania and Australia for the actual interview, but that is originally where he is from, with a background in engineering and, of course, now vast experience when it comes to lobbying at the United Nations. We're talking about the Secretary of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, Peter Smith. Peter, welcome along today.
Thank you, Anne.
Great to have your company. I mentioned that you've been lobbying for 18 years now worldwide, going across in terms of issues to do with pro-life and pro-the family as well. But where I would actually like to start today's interview was a little bit about your own background. Tell us a bit about your own personal story, how you came to be a Christian, and more importantly, how you came to be involved with the organisation.
Well, I didn't grow up in a Christian family, although a lot of our morality was Christian-based, and looking back on my family history, I had a great-grandfather and great-grandmother who were believers, but next generation down there, a couple of great-aunts who were believers. I think my mother's father was a believer, but he died before I was born. I never knew him. And I didn't get converted till I was 30, and I got saved at a barbecue in Sunshine in Melbourne. First night I heard the gospel.
The very first time you'd heard the message, that was the night that you got saved. What was it about the message that struck you, Peter? Can you remember that far back as to what you were actually thinking?
Well, for 6 years I'd been searching, what is the point of life? I'd been the first in my family to get a university degree, and I had a good job at Caterpillar, good career prospects ahead of me, and I just saw that to excel in industry, you had to give your body and soul to the company. Mm-hmm. And I thought, it's not worth it. And then I was left with, well, what is the point of life? Why are we here? And for about 6 years I searched. But that night, when I went to this barbecue, the man there, Bruce Leslie, I saw the love of Christ shine out of that man's eyes. And I thought, what he has, I want. And he just shared his testimony. I'd never heard a Christian's testimony before. And I just thought, good news. Mm. All I have to do is commit my worthless life to Christ and ask him to forgive me my sins and give me the gift of eternal life, and that's it. And I thought, wow, what a great deal. And he took me aside into this other room and was showing me all these Bible verses, and I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to pray and get saved. And I felt the sin come off my shoulders like a rock that night.
Wow.
And 2 days later, I was in North Queensland on a business with the only businessman I knew who was a born-again Christian that we'd planned 4 months before. So God put me in just exactly the right place 2 days after I was saved. And I was with that dear brother in Queensland in November last year, reminiscing about some of those days.
Fabulous. So, I mean, that's how you came to the Lord. Those were the circumstances for you getting saved. Obviously, a lot has happened since that eventful barbecue. Mm-hmm. How about your involvement with the organisation? How did that all come about? And tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Well, in 1986, I felt a call from the Lord to train for the ministry. And I felt called to study at the Bible Training Institute in Glasgow. And as we were leaving Melbourne, the same couple who invited me to the barbecue where I got saved invited me to see a pro-life movie in a little private theaterette in Melbourne. And I was just horrified at what was happening. It was an American. It was the Eclipse of Reason, or one of those films. But I didn't know any pro-life group existed anywhere in the world. It was never mentioned in any church I was in. You never heard anything of it in the television or the newspapers in Melbourne. It was just never discussed, never mentioned. And when I was living in Prestwick, I saw someone wearing a little badge like this, little Precious Feet badge. And I asked them, I said to Will, Big Will, where can I get one of those? And he said, oh, SPUC. I thought, what on earth? SPUC. So I rode away to the office in Glasgow, and they sent me all these leaflets, and I joined up. And but I didn't. And I formed a branch there where I lived in Ayr and Prestwick. But I never really thought about doing that as a calling. I wanted to be a church pastor or something, but no one wanted me to do that. So went back to Tasmania, went back into engineering for 3 years, and ended up running a pro-life group there. And the day my mother died, the Lord said to me, the main reason for your being here is gone. And I knew I had to go back to Britain and work for SPUC.
Amazing.
But they didn't have any jobs. So I'd inherited some money from my mum's estate, and I could buy a house outright. And I worked for them for 5 months for no salary. And now they pay me to do the same thing.
So your actual official title, we're putting details incidentally across the screen because we know that so many of you, this is a subject that so many of you are going to want to be delving into a little bit further. We'll put details up as to certainly how you can contact Peter, how you can access the SPUC website, etc. But SPUC, what would you say, what is their role? What is it they do within the whole sort of pro-life movement? What is their role?
Well, SPUC is the first national pro-life group that started in the world. It was founded by 12 people, 1st of January 1967. And it was set up to oppose David Steele's private members bill to legalise abortion. And we've been battling ever since. SPUC employs about 30 people full-time, and I believe is a very effective organisation.
Well, this is really going to be our subject for the interview. And, you know, just as we kind of really get into it, Peter, here, I'd like to almost backtrack slightly to, you mentioned 1967 a moment ago, you mentioned the name David Steele again. And when we actually think about legislation and the amazing changes that happened in this country, I'd like to talk about how did we get to where we are today? And there's one name I want to put to you. You can find out about this on the website, on SPUC's website, and that is the name Alex Bourne. Give us a little bit about the background as to how we got to where we are today.
Well, in the 20th century, abortion became a little bit safer. Prior to that, it was incredibly problematic and dangerous. In the past, all through recorded history, there's been herbal remedies to induce abortions, which often killed the woman. Were very dangerous. And to do anything surgically without antibiotics and sterile conditions is very dangerous. But in the 20th century, surgery became safe because of, anaesthetics and, they could knock you out and the shock of a surgical procedure didn't kill you. And then in 1936, there was a 14-year-old girl who was supposedly gang raped by some guardsmen in London. And Dr. Alex Bourne aborted her and then surrendered himself to the police. And the celebrated court case of Rex versus Bourne, there the judge decided that the girl would have become a physical and mental wreck if she'd have been forced to give birth to this child. There's no medical or psychological basis for that, by the way, but this is how the case was pled, and Dr. Bourne got off. Now, between 1936 and 1967, if you had money and went to a certain doctor in a certain city in Britain and pretended you'd commit suicide if you didn't get the abortion, you'd get the abortion. The number of dangerous, illegal backstreet abortions, I believe, was very, very small.
Yeah, that is...
Very small. Very small.
The big argument, isn't it?
See, the coat hanger abortions that they talk about are, by and large, I believe, in the area of myth. The number of women who have self-aborted their babies with a rusty coat hanger, I believe, is so close to zero it doesn't count. if I could just digress for a moment to Sri Lanka, where a lot of abortion clinics got shut down after one of my visits. All those doctors doing the abortions were retired government medical doctors supplementing their government pensions. And there was absolutely no difference in the safety of those abortions, whether they were legal or illegal. Absolutely no difference at all. But this is one of the spectres that is thrown up, that oh, you must have abortion legal, otherwise all these women are going to die from illegal backstreet abortions. But if you look at the maternal mortality figures for Britain, they plummeted from between 1930 and 1950. When antibiotics and penicillin and the precursors of penicillin became available to treat for bacterial infection. Legalising abortion doesn't save women's lives. And the 67, David Steele's 67 Abortion Act was an act to clarify the law from the Rex versus Bourne legal precedent. So that's how we got here. Now, I don't know if that girl was actually raped or consented. It's hard to know. But this was...
that was the case that was used.
It was a typical hard case, and in America they did the same thing. Norma McAvee claimed to have been raped when she wasn't, and she was the case of Roe versus Wade. She's now become a pro-lifer.
Interestingly enough, just tell us a little bit what happened with Alex Bourne after that.
Well, Alex Bourne saw what was happening and how what he had done eventually led to abortion on demand, and he became a member of SPUC.
In terms of that bill getting passed in 1967, a little bit before my time, Peter, but in terms of that actually going through, was it mainly to make it safer? Was that the big argument? Yes,
one of the biggest arguments David Steele, and he still claims it was to save women's lives, which is just not true. Now, yes, some women did die from illegal abortion. Today, women still die from legal abortion.
Yeah. But how did we get from, or how do you see the fact that we got from this is going to make abortion safer, and therefore that's why we're introducing it, to, well, there isn't really anything wrong with it and it's my body and it's my right to choose what I do? I mean, that's quite a big jump from bringing something in on the basis of safety and health to where we're at the moment.
The 67 Abortion Act is a biological fiction, because it claims that this baby is part of the woman's body, which is patently not true, because half the babies are male and they only have half the DNA from the mother. And you would flunk first year high school biology if you claimed the baby was part of the mother's body. It's just not true. And in Britain we have a medical fiction that abortion is somehow beneficial to women. That's the claim. Now, there have been some very interesting studies done, one in Finland, where it was found that women having abortions are 3.5 times more likely to die than women giving birth to babies. And the reason for that is, if you count all the suicides, pregnant woman almost never commits suicide. And a woman with a young baby almost never commits suicide. But a woman who's had an abortion is far more likely to commit suicide, far more likely to get involved in drug and alcohol abuse, which can lead to death.
This seems to be an appropriate time to say that we will be mentioning this throughout, and certainly at the end of the programme, that because of the sensitive nature of what we're talking about, if this is something that has happened to you or to someone you know, again, we'll be putting details throughout the programme up on your screen of certainly the website for SPUC will direct you to various organisations and people who really can help you if you're in need of counselling or any other help, which is excellent, because I think we can't lose sight of that as well. So many people have gone through abortion who have not committed suicide, but not a day goes by where they're not suffering in some way or another,
Yes.
as a consequence of a choice they made, perhaps recently, perhaps many, many years ago.
Most of those choices are without informed consent.
Yeah.
Women are not told that's what your baby looks like. They're not told of the consequences. They're not told of the possible psychological consequences. See, if a woman knows abortion is wrong, those women suffer more after they have an abortion. See, you can suction the baby out of the womb, but it's very difficult to suction the memory of that baby out of her mind. And when a woman gets pregnant, she is programmed to hold a baby 9 months later. And you have a thing called empty arms syndrome. And women have problems on the anniversary of when the baby would have been born, the anniversary of the abortion. But the medical profession, by and large, do not care, because if they did start to admit to some of these problems, they would have to admit that what they have done has contributed to those problems.
How does just a little bit about the law actually in the UK. How does the law stand with regards to abortion in the UK? At what point, up until what term, can somebody go and have an abortion, more or less on demand?
If you go to a doctor and say, I don't want to be pregnant, doctor, this is a baby at 20 weeks of pregnancy, 4 weeks after that, and you're quite a lot bigger then, the baby can be terminated. If you have disability, a baby with disability, you can have a termination up to birth. It's one of the most liberal laws in the world, apart from Canada, where it's just the child is not recognised in the womb as having any rights whatsoever. Here, there's meant to be a medical justification for it. Now, the medical justification that is used is that a termination is helpful to the women's mental health. But there's absolutely no evidence that it helps women's mental health.
And is that just based on your local GP, your own doctor? It's not necessarily, you don't need to have two people agree to this, or?
Well, the GP signs the one
consent
signature and the abortionist signs the other.
So the abortionist, the person performing the abortion will look at what the GP has said, and then they're not going to go against it. They're not going to.
In some cases, they've found the forms already pre-signed. It's just done as a matter of, in most cases, it's just done as a matter of routine, the two signatures.
So what would you say in terms of a percentage of young women going along, or women of any age for that matter, going along to see their GP and them saying, no, we're actually advising against an abortion? Would you say, Peter, that's a very, very small percentage, or? Infinitesimally
small.
Most of the time they will go along with it.
There are some Christian GP practices where they wouldn't refer for abortion, but they are incredibly rare. And if you don't refer on to another doctor that will do the referral,
you could be in trouble.
The BMA will give you grief.
Yeah, you could be in serious trouble.
Yes.
So you mentioned Canada a moment ago having far more liberal legislation.
Well, they have no legislation because their Bill of Rights only kicks in once you're born and wanted. Prior to that, you don't exist. You're just not there, as far as in the eyes of the law. Once you're born and wanted, then you are eligible for their Bill of Rights.
See, I mean, this seems to be the crux of the matter, and I think if you know, Christian, non-Christian, we certainly know there are many, probably predominantly the audience or the viewership is Christian, but there'll be a lot of non-Christians flicking through, channel hopping or whatever. But certainly when you're out there, chatting to people, in the world, there are lots and lots of what they would class as good reasons as to why abortion should not be illegal. What are some of the most common objections, and how do you see we can overcome them?
The most common thing that's thrown up, like at the UN, is that that's a woman's right. The only way a woman can be truly equal to a man is with abortion on demand. And that's so that a woman can have sex with whoever, and then at the end of the day can walk away without a baby, as men can do. And I think that if women's rights are built upon the death of their unborn children, it's a pretty sad way of having rights, because one person's rights means the death of somebody else.
And also as well, though, just what you alluded to a few moments ago, there are so many people out there who will say, yeah, but, you know, at what point, and this is the big argument, at what point does life begin?
Well, everyone knows from the very simplest biology textbook that a cow begins its life when the egg and sperm come together in the womb. Same with a dog, same with a cat, same with any mammal. And when human beings have sex and the egg and sperm come together and the 23 chromosomes from the sperm and the egg join, and you get those 46 human chromosomes in that first cell, that's you. Your DNA never changes from there ever. That's you. Now, we all know that that's when we biologically begin. Now, people come up with all sorts of amazing ideas about, well, you're not really a person, you're not really made in the image and likeness of God then. Some Christians will even say, oh, well, you don't have a soul until you breathe. Once you're born and you breathe in and you have a soul. Now, once you connect to your mother's womb at like 6 days after conception, you're getting oxygen from your mother's blood supply. So when you breathe, it's just a different way of getting the air into you. You're getting the air in from the sixth day all the way through.
But also in terms of, from a biblical viewpoint as well, there's, there are so many examples in Scripture of, life in the womb. And certainly David gave us quite a few in the Psalms.
Psalm 139. And also, when was the incarnation? Not at the birth of Jesus, it was at the conception of Jesus.
And interestingly enough, I looked at something on your website and it was giving the example of what the terminology that Elizabeth used with the Virgin Mary when she called her a mother. So if the fetus isn't theoretically alive or a being or a human person, then how can you call a mother of something that doesn't exist if you don't have a child? Absolutely.
And you see, in the New Testament, the Greek word for small child is brephos. Okay, that's the Greek word for it. And when the writers, the inspired writers of those Gospels wrote them down, they talked about the child in the womb as suffer the little children to come unto me. Same word.
Same word that was used.
And one time we used to call a pregnant woman great with child.
Yes.
And that's the perfect way to call
very true.
A pregnant woman.
Yes.
Now we say embryo and fetus as if a fetus isn't a person.
No, but it also dehumanises a little bit.
Dehumanises the human being, that's all it does.
Well,
they never say Kate's baby is a fetus.
Yes.
Kate's baby will be an heir to the throne, perhaps. They never talk about her baby as something not human or not a person.
That's really interesting you say that, Peter, because also the other thing that springs to mind there is health and safety issues. It's almost like whether it's a child or a human being or not is almost determined by do we want the child or not. And if you think about it, I don't know, say you had a car that was manufactured and the seatbelts didn't work properly, and a woman was in that car and that was negligence on their part. If she was pregnant and lost that child, there'd be a big hoo-ha, because that would be very much a baby, that would be very much a child, but that's because the child is wanted.
Yes, in America, if someone shoots a pregnant woman, okay, in some states of America, if you shoot a pregnant woman and they can't get the baby out in time to save the baby and the baby dies, you're charged with 2 murders. It's a double murder.
Really?
That's not the case here, but it is in some states of the United States.
Well, let's just bring it up to date, because we've been looking at how we got to this stage, the background to the Abortion Act coming into force in the UK. What are some of the main issues that are actually currently taking place? It's a long time ago, 1967. Where are we today? What's actually happening out there in the world in terms of pro-life, in terms of abortion?
Well, in the developed world, where we have abortion on demand in most of the developed world, we have below replacement fertility. See, you look at the economic problems in Greece and Spain and Italy and Portugal, lowest fertility rate in Europe. And once you get a very low fertility rate with a social welfare system, you need a lot of young taxpayers coming up to support the system to keep all the oldies like me going. And we haven't had enough babies.
Demographically, that's a problem in many countries.
Demographically, we're committing suicide.
Yes.
And there is absolutely no way that our current welfare state can survive. There's no way. Now, in some countries, like Uganda and Nigeria and a lot of Middle East countries, they have massive birth rates. And Britain, when it became an industrialised nation, had a massively high birth rate. So did the United States. And people forget that. See, we've been educated to this, the world's overpopulated nonsense for decades. And that's also driven this, the whole thing about abortion on demand. Because people will say, well, it's not a very nice thing. Oh, but there's too many people in the world. That's rubbish.
Yeah, but
there's no way there's too many people in the world. We can never have too many people.
Why do you say that if someone's watching thinking, but I've heard about, you know, we're being, or, you know, the world's not geared up for this and supplies are not going to be, everything's going to run out, etc.
Yes. Well, when I was at high school in Tasmania in the early 1960s, we were taught, I remember the lesson, we were taught Australia would run out of iron ore in 20 years' time. Okay? Now, why has Australia got a booming economy at the moment? Do you know why? Because Australia is one of the major exporters of iron ore to China. Virtually all the iron ore, all the iron products coming out of Australia were dug out of the mountains in Western Australia. I've been there where these mines are. It is enormously amount of iron ore that's there. You see, people don't understand what it means about, you know, how much oil or iron or bauxite we've got. See, how many times you heard we're running out of oil? People have been saying that for 100 years. What it means is that when they talk about 20 years reserves, it means with today's technology, with our known methods of extracting this whatever...
everything's staying the same as we're doing it at the moment.
See, I'm an engineer. Okay? Clever engineers work out how to get this stuff out of the ground cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over years, over the years. And then you have all these other massive reserves that then become a reserve because they're economical to get out of the ground. I mean, we use hardly any of the earth.
Well, we've heard so much, again, and we certainly, on Revelation TV, there's been many programmes about, you know, the reality of global warming, etc., which is another one that's bandied around.
And I remember in my final year at the University of Tasmania having a lecturer come from Chicago, Illinois, to talk to us about global cooling. And that was the fashion back then in the early 1970s, that we were going to have global cooling. And I remember the lecturer quite well. He said he was going to get an extra 20 feet of snow in Chicago. And now the fashion is global warming. And I say, hello, wake up to yourselves. This is a con trick, an absolute con trick.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago that on the one hand, countries like Canada have got a far more liberal way about them when it comes to current legislation, who's allowed to do what. At the moment, as we speak, in Ireland, it's still very much against abortion. But you were talking earlier, and you obviously see what's happening over there at the moment. The potential for that changing is definitely on the horizon.
Yes, you see, there's been one woman die in questionable circumstances, and the police haven't come forward to say what's happened. And there's a whole lot of rumour and innuendo about it all. But see, that kind of case is what's used to bring in abortion legislation. And once you get a little bit of abortion legalised, it's like saying, well, we'll have a little bit of slavery.
Yeah.
Or we'll have a little bit of racial prejudice, or we'll have a little bit of this or that. Once you get a little bit of something, you get the lot. And that's what they're trying to do.
And also, Peter, as you quite rightly say, that's something maybe the media are jumping all over that.
Of course.
But again, on your website, you're showing details of a woman who died, who's recently had an abortion in the third term.
A legal abortion.
A legal abortion.
Yeah,
and
yes.
she has sadly died. But
Yes.
that's maybe something that we're not going to hear.
Well, never. You'll never hear that. You'll never ever hear that. The media doesn't deal in that kind of news.
Something quite controversial, and I must admit, I got quite a shock when I saw this on your website, because Red Nose Day is mentioned, and
Yes.
for the great majority of us, everybody's putting on their red noses, and we all think we're doing something, very
You think
good.
you're doing something good.
Exactly. Now, just tell us a little bit about why have you highlighted Red Nose Day on your website?
They give money to International Planned Parenthood Federation, the biggest promoters and providers of abortion in the world. Why would you want to give money to an organisation that's going to give money to those sort of people? Now, when I was at Bible college, we used to have Red Nose Day, and I'm sure people there did not know where the money went. I wouldn't give a penny to Red Nose Day.
I mean, there are lots and lots of organisations who are going to be getting money. But as you say, when we're sitting watching programmes, when we're getting involved, there's very few of us who know precisely where the money's going.
Well, on our website, we give a list of these groups who give money to perform abortion and embryo experimentation and all the rest of it. And you could look it up on our website.
So we're not just talking here about facilitating or encouraging abortion, but you're talking about other areas too that maybe if people knew, they wouldn't be so ready to part with the money.
Yeah. And you see, some groups do some good things, like UNICEF do many good things. But however, UNICEF also promote sexual and reproductive rights for adolescents and teenagers. And they are promoting abortion on demand for teenagers, unmarried people. I could never support UNICEF because of that.
That brings us on to a whole other area here, the area of education, because, you're sitting here and a lot of us might think we kind of know what's going on out there, but in the correspondence that I've had with you, Peter, and certainly in the conversations, whether over the phone or meeting earlier, personally speaking, I'm quite astonished by a lot of what you're saying that's actually going on out there. How big a part do you think, how much more do you think we need to be educated, and how can we become more educated as to what's happening out there?
Well, if you listen to the main news channels on your television here, and most of the daily papers are not pro-life. The Daily Telegraph is, and the Daily Mail is reasonably pro-life, but none of the rest are. You get filtered news here. You get one side of everything. But you were talking to me earlier on about what we'll talk about today, and I picked up a Metro newspaper at Prestwick train station when I left to come down here.
Just hold that up just a second again. We didn't actually get a chance to see that.
Oh, the Metro.
Yeah.
There's the Metro. Can you see that there?
Yeah, we've got it.
And the story I spotted on page 14, trafficked to marry against their will. Now, it's a very good story about what is happening in China. Now, there are certain institutions like the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation. These groups poured money into population control NGOs, non-governmental organisations, in the 1960s and 70s. And those people were able to convince China that they were poor because they were having too many children. Now, this staggers me that the women's organisations are so silent on this issue. Those awful communist Chinese officials, mainly men, were able to blame all the women of China for the problems of China being so backward. China was backward because of communism, not because of them having too many children. It was an absolute lie. But they have swallowed the bait, hook, line and sinker. They still have this one-child policy. Now, it's not one child everywhere, but in the cities it is. And this is the result you get. Now, if you're forced to have one child in China, there's basically no social services in China. Once you get old and cannot work, you will starve to death in China. That's the reality. That's the reality in most countries of the world. If you get old and cannot work, you starve to death. And the only way you're going to survive in old age is with a son who will care for you in your old age.
So the males are favoured then? The
males are favoured. One reason is so they will care for their elderly parents when they can no longer work. And there's also a religious component where you have ancestor worship in China. You worship the male, you pray to the male ancestors. And the same in India with Hinduism. You've got a man's meant to help you across the river when you supposedly get into heaven. So there's a religious component. And in India you've got the dowry system where you have to cost you a lot of money to give the money away with the daughter when she gets married. So there's about 200 million baby girls missing because of sex selection, abortion and neglect of baby girls. And the women's groups around the world do hee-haw about this.
And this is why women are being trafficked into China from Burma.
Yes.
Because there are no... Well, there are no women in China.
If you're the bottom of the pecking order in China, see the communist Chinese officials, they're all going to get a wife. They're the top of the pile, okay? But as you go down through the system and you get down to the poor farmers, the not so handsome looking people, the disabled men, where are they going to get a wife? They're the bottom of the system. And they will just buy a wife from Burma. And the people traffickers they just get these people and say, oh, we've got a job for you in a factory in China. You can earn all this money and send it back to help your family. And they head off to China and they end up sorry, no, there isn't a factory. Here's your husband. And they're forcibly married and locked up in their houses. It's absolutely horrendous what's going on.
I don't think certainly an interview, Peter, would be complete on this subject without talking about, almost like a designer baby. When we're talking about in China, okay, male over female. How far are we away from, would you say, in your opinion, people actually specifying exactly what they want in a child? Is that some kind of science fiction thing, or do you think that's a reality?
Well, we already have legislation to approve for saviour siblings where a woman can have IVF, even though she's fertile, and you make the embryos in the Petri dish and you do pre-implantation diagnosis. You take one cell off the embryo and check it for compatibility with your born child who needs some transplant material. And you can select which embryo is the closest genetic mix. So we already have that legislation passed. Basically what you can do at the moment is discard for what you don't want. Yeah. We haven't got to the case where we can actually genetically manipulate the human DNA yet. But what is done is, and this is another way of having sex selection, is you only have, only put the male embryos in the womb and you don't put ones with certain genetic problems. But we're a long way off designer babies yet, but we're fiddling about in areas where we really shouldn't.
Where do you see things going, Peter? This is us, it's 2013. What do you see happening in this whole area 5, 10, 20 years from now?
I would predict that in 20, 30 years' time will be the Islamic Republic of the United Kingdom, because it's the Muslims having the babies. And it's just
Yes, that's
a simple matter of numbers. And already the most common boy's name in the UK is Mohammed and Ahmed. And all the government officials are all very touchy when you start talking about these things. But if you're having 4 or 6 babies, each family, and if you go back to Pakistan or somewhere to get husbands and wives for them, that doubles it. And if the indigenous people here, like you and me, are having 1 baby, well, you don't have to be a big mathematician to work out the numbers. And we're having massive immigration because we haven't got enough people to keep the system going. So there are certain... See, there's a very telling passage at the back of Deuteronomy here where the children of Israel are about to go into the promised land. And
just while you're looking,
I should have looked this up before.
That's okay. It's all very spur of the moment. But just while
here it is. I got it.
You got it.
This day, Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. This day I call heaven and earth as witness against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God. Listen to his voice and hold fast to him. Now, it's a package deal. If you're going to choose life, you'll get blessing. But if you choose death, you get curse. And Britain, by and large, is now a culture of death, and has chosen death, and has chosen curse. And sadly, there are consequences to these things. You can't keep getting lower and lower birth rates, over 200,000 abortions a year, and there not be consequences. And the consequences are that the reign of the Anglo-Saxons and Celts in the United Kingdom is fast coming to an end. Same in Belgium, same in France, same in Germany. In fact, Colonel Gaddafi some years ago said, "Well, we don't need terrorist bombers to take over Europe. The strength of our women's wombs will do it." And if every adult gets a vote, it doesn't take long before things change.
It's a very taboo subject. I mean, it's a subject for our interview at this moment in time. But, you know, even as Christians, if a subject that comes up in conversation, maybe we're not actually speaking about it, but we can get quite nervous. This country, you were talking about a silence that's almost fallen on Britain, where we are. Is it that we're embarrassed? Is it because we feel we don't have a strong enough argument? Is it political correctness? What keeps us silent in this country, would you say, Peter?
Well, there's a very strong British tradition. And even though I was born in Australia, all my ancestors were British. And my mother was very British in those ways. Anything difficult or hard, we don't talk about that. That was the coping mechanism. We don't talk about it. You see? And if it's anything to do with sex and problematic things, well, see, I'll give you an example. I was being driven up to Glasgow Airport one time by this taxi driver, and she knew I went to the UN. And this day she said, "What do you do at the UN?" I says, "I'm a right to life lobbyist." She says, "Oh, a fetus isn't a person." I said, "Why not?" No answer. You see, we've all been programmed to believe the fetus isn't a person. Okay? The fetus isn't a person. We're programmed that. Fetus isn't a person. Oh, we don't really know when life begins. President Obama doesn't even know when life begins. He was asked, "When does life begin, Mr. President?" And he said, "Oh, it's above my pay grade." Then he shouldn't have been President of the United States, in my view. But he is, but there you go. And people think, well, you see, so many women hurt because of their abortion experience. They never want anyone to talk about it. And when I preach in churches, which is pretty rare in the UK, there are always women who've had abortions. And I can pick them out in the congregation. I can see the pain on their faces because they're hurting. And they've never heard anyone speak about this before. They've never heard anyone say, you can get help. Our organisation, Arch, can help people. Margaret Cuthill can help people. She had 2 abortions before she got converted. She knows what it's like. She's been through it. She can help people. And because a lot of Christians don't know about the help you can get, they're too afraid to talk about it. And best not to talk about it.
Yeah, the other thing I would like to see at that, just at that point is, you know, whether you've had an abortion prior to becoming a Christian, but also there could well be people watching who, as Christians, made that choice and have suffered even more so because they feel that they've somehow committed the unforgivable sin, and there is help for them too.
Yes. The only unforgivable sin I can find in this book, the Bible, is unbelief.
Yeah.
That's the only one. And God can forgive you. He loves you. He loves you. And no matter what you've done, especially if you're one of His chosen people, loved people, He wants to heal you. He wants to make you whole. We have a whole bunch of women come to the UN who've had abortions. And boy, they cause some trouble at the UN.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I know we're not going to have much time left, but I'd like to hear about what actually goes on, because we talk about lobbying at the UN. And, you know, if you're anything like me, it's like, well, what does that look like? What happens? Is it a big stand-up fisticuffs? What actually goes on there?
Very rarely are there fistfights at the UN. In Geneva, occasionally there's the odd one, but in New York, there's normally no punch-ups.
Right.
Okay? But Anne, the only way you could really find out is come along and see. And I take people to the UN to show them what it's like, show you what happens, show you who does what to who, show you where the decisions are made, who pushes who. And
sounds like a game of chess, actually, doesn't it?
It's a personal thing in a lot of ways. See, I know lots and lots of delegates at the UN. I've been going there 18 years. I've been to over 100 meetings at the UN, over 100. And I know lots of people there. And some people who don't necessarily take my position on life issues will still do things to help me.
Yeah.
Okay? Recently, last year I was there, and one of my colleagues heard someone talking about me, this pro-abortion lady, and she said, there goes Mr. Pro-Life. So they know what I'm on about. I'm Mr. Pro-Life at the UN. There's a whole bunch of us there that are pro-life and pro-family, and most of the countries of the world support us. But the countries with the money, like the US and the EU and Britain, Canada, they got Australia, they got the money, New Zealand, but they're pushing this culture of death.
But what about then, I mean, a lot of people might say, well, is there any point in doing anything? Because it sounds like, you know, it's just a couple of small voices. Practically speaking, is there any point in objecting? What can we do?
Well, what did the Lord say to us? What's this thing? It's in the Sermon on the Mount, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I see. Now it's in here somewhere. It's called being salt and light.
Yeah.
Right?
And hiding your light under a bushel.
Yeah, now you see, you are the salt of the earth. Salt is to prevent something going rotten. So we are the salt at the UN, trying to convince the world not to go totally rotten. And we are a light. Now, the UN is a very dark place. And the darker a place, the more a little candle shines out. And we're little candles for the Lord at the UN. And this little badge, this is a little thing, but that got me involved with the pro-life movement. Little things.
Well, I think
I'm like the little grain of sand
yeah.
in Goliath's shoe. You see, and you can put someone off with a little discomfort in the foot. You see, and I've been able to achieve, and my colleagues, things at the UN, which are amazing because the Lord holds the nations in the palm of His hand. And He can give them courage to speak up. And sometimes they do. And sometimes they rebel against the big, strong countries. But if we're not there, bad things happen.
Be very dark.
And if we are there, less bad things happen. So we do have this salt does work. We do prevent a little bit of decay.
And practically speaking for us, because certainly we might not all be in a position to go off to the UN, but what can we do on a daily basis? What can, viewers watching now that think, I thought, the abortion, 1967, it's a sad fact of life, but there isn't anything really I can do. What can I do? What can we do?
Satan would have you believe you can't do anything. But if you look down through history, there's been a lot of amazing things, some good, some bad, that have been done by one person. One woman in America got prayer banned in schools. One woman.
That was the cause of
one woman. One woman got prayer banned. Her son got converted, actually, but that's another story. One person can do a lot.
Now, you've got a book there that I know you want to
We
show
give
us.
this away free. George Verwer from OM's gets them from. He's mates with Randy Alcorn, and he gets these by the gross, and we give them away free. If you want one of these, email me, and I'll send you a free copy of Why Pro-Life, and it says Caring for the Unborn and Their Mothers.
So that's going to give us some information, some guidelines as well.
A lot of good information. If you'd like to be involved with SPUC, if you'd like to pray for me, just send me your email and I'll put you on my prayer list, and you'll get my blogs, and it'll tell you where I'm coming and what I'm doing. And how
good a fisherman you are as well, Peter.
If you, now you
That's another story.
We could talk all day about my fishing exploits, because I'm a very strong believer here in this part of Genesis. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea. And I'm not pro-life with the fish.
Well, I tell you, there's lots of photos to back that up, certainly on Peter's blog, should you get an opportunity to look at it. But, I mean, a lot of good information there as well. We are in the closing minutes. I do want to kind of just very, very briefly make a distinction, or you can maybe make that distinction for us, Peter. A lot of people hear the words pro-life, pro-life activist, and it conjures up images of burning down abortion clinics and death threats to people who perform abortions. What distinction would you like to make between what SPUC do and that other extreme that tends to be across the pond a lot of the times, let's face it?
SPUC does not agree with breaking the law. We don't believe killing abortion doctors is the answer. In fact, yelling murder at people that have abortions is not the way to go. That's not going to help in any sense at all. We're meant to be salt and light. We're meant to be a sweet fragrance of Christ. And we're meant to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. And being abusive to people. When we're at the UN, I've had 100 people sometimes at the UN with me. I say to them, if I ever find you being nasty to any of the pro-abortionists, I will call the security guard and have you thrown out of the building and the pass taken away, and you'll never get back in here under one of my passes. We are always nice to everybody. Spitting in people's faces doesn't help at all.
No, it doesn't help the cause.
Doesn't help at all. And I sit down and talk like this to whoever I can, and give a calm, rational, scientific justification for why the fetus is a person, why every human life is precious.
I know this is probably a little bit of a challenge, but in the closing moments, in like 1 or 2 sentences, if I was a woman that you met on the street, on the bus, on the train, and for some reason I said to you, I'm considering having an abortion, what would you say to me?
I can help you. You're not alone. You can have help. It might be problematic for you at the moment, but your child can be a blessing that you could not imagine. Please do not throw away that blessing.
That's fabulous. Peter, it's been a great talking to you on this very, very sensitive subject. And I think hopefully it will encourage us all not to be silent, not to be the ones that, oh, it's taboo, let's not talk about it. either to people who are struggling in this area, considering it, or perhaps to those of us who have maybe made that choice previously, no matter how long ago. There is definitely help out there. And if you go on to Peter's website, there is a wealth of information there letting you know not just what the organisation is doing in the latest in the news, but also pointing you in that direction for help for yourself or help for others, other people that you know that potentially may be struggling. And I'm afraid that's about all we've got time for, Peter, but I know you're no stranger to Revelation TV, and you must come back very, very soon, and we'll talk some more. Thank you very much for joining us today. God bless you all. Take care. Lovely to have your company. We'll see you again very, very soon.